Welcome to our deep dive into homelessness in America.
Oh, a deep dive.
Yeah, going beyond just skimming the surface, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
We're going to get into those systemic issues, the historical stuff, and try to dismantle some of those stereotypes that get thrown around.
Right.
Our main source for today is They Just Need to Get a Job.
Okay.
It's written by Mary Brosnahan, and she's someone who's spent decades working with unhoused people, so she knows her stuff.
Yeah, she does. It's an incredible book, really eye-opening. She lays bare all those myths that really shape how we think about homelessness.
Like how?
All those myths, like the ones that affect public opinion and policies, the kind of stuff that just gets repeated so often it feels like truth, even when it's not.
Okay, so let's get into that. Let's dismantle some of those myths. I think one that I hear all the time is that homelessness is just like a recent problem. Back in the good old days, it didn't exist.
Right, that whole "it wasn't like this when I was a kid" argument.
Right, exactly.
But Brosnahan actually traces homelessness back centuries.
Oh.
Yeah, centuries. She links it to, a really fundamental shift in how we think about land and ownership, like back in the day.
This is where it gets fascinating for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
She talks about like the commons, that land that was for everyone, that was eradicated, and then private property comes up in its place.
Right, right.
This is like a huge turning point in how we view things.
Absolutely. And because of that, because land became private, people were forced into wage labor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so suddenly, like, your survival is totally tied to a job.
Right.
And if those jobs are hard to come by or don't pay you enough, well, then homelessness becomes a very real possibility.
It makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the economic piece of it, right?
Right.
I remember Brosnahan also talks about like how societal attitudes towards poverty also played a role.
Yeah. Societal attitudes are huge. This is where that whole concept of like worthy versus unworthy poor comes into play.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately,
Yeah.
that still shapes how we approach poverty even today.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. Brosnahan points to the influence of Calvinism, back in the day, that really emphasized personal responsibility and like viewed charity with suspicion.
Oh, so it's like if you're struggling, it's your fault, not the system's fault.
Exactly. And you see that reflected even in like early forms of assistance,
Like what?
like poorhouses,
Oh, yeah.
which often were more about punishing people for not working rather than, genuinely trying to help them.
Wow. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. The whole system was set up differently then.
So going back to those root causes, policy decisions have obviously had a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the 20th century. Oh, my gosh. Huge impact.
Yeah.
This is where Brosnahan really dives deep. I mean, one example that really hit me, it was the destruction of those single-room occupancy housing units. The SROs.
Oh, yeah.
They provided affordable housing for so many people, but they were targeted by these urban renewal programs.
Wait, you mean they were deliberately destroyed?
Oh, it gets even worse.
Oh, no.
Brosnahan details how landlords were actually encouraged to neglect their SRO properties.
No way. Why?
Because they can make way for fancier, more profitable developments. Really been like intentional disinvestment in affordable housing. It's wild.
Oh, my God. That's awful. I had no idea.
It's like this calculated destruction of people's homes, just swept under the rug.
It's scary to think about how decisions made decades ago are still having such a big impact on us today.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize we need to be super careful about policies that put profit over people.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Okay, we've talked about the history, we've talked about policy. What about the whole mental illness and homelessness thing? I know there are tons of misconceptions about that.
Oh, totally. It's a really nuanced issue. I mean, it's not a simple cause and effect relationship. You know what I mean?
Like, people think mental illness leads to homelessness, but it's not that straightforward.
Exactly. While mental health can play a role in housing instability, the reverse is also true. Homelessness itself can worsen existing conditions. It's a vicious cycle.
Right. The stress of being homeless, no access to care, it all compounds.
Exactly. Brosnahan talks about that case of Joyce Brown in New York, that homeless woman who was involuntarily hospitalized. That sparked a massive debate about, forced treatment versus individual rights.
I remember that case. It's so ethically complex.
It is, and it shows just how hard it is to find solutions that respect people's autonomy while making sure they get the help they need.
So what's the answer?
Brosnahan really pushes for supportive housing. To me, it seems like the most logical solution.
Supportive housing. So like providing a stable place to live and the support people need to thrive.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Stable housing is the foundation for everything else. It's almost impossible to work on your mental health, find a job, any of that, when you don't have a safe place to live.
Makes sense. You can't run a marathon with a broken leg, right? You need to heal first.
Exactly. But there's another huge factor that Brosnahan talks about that's a bit intimidating to wrap your head around. The financialization of housing.
Uh-oh. That sounds complicated.
Yeah, it is, but it's important. Basically, in recent times, housing has become more about making money for investors than it is about being a basic human need.
Like, people are buying up houses just to make a profit, not to actually live in them.
Exactly. Deregulation of the financial industry, the rise of these weird financial instruments, it's all driven prices through the roof. It's not just supply and demands anymore.
And then you throw in that whole 2008 housing crisis.
All those foreclosures.
It's no wonder we're in this mess.
It's scary how vulnerable we are to these economic forces.
So where do we go from here? I mean, is there any hope? Because this is all starting to feel kind of bleak, not gonna lie.
Brosnahan does offer hope. There's this model called housing first.
Housing first. Like, just giving people homes, no strings attached. Really?
I know it sounds too simple, right? But it's actually a very strategic approach.
I admit, when I first heard of it, I was skeptical. It's like, that'll never work. But then I looked into what happened in Finland, and wow, you OW.
Finland. Oh, Finland is doing amazing things with housing first. They've drastically reduced homelessness. And what's crazy, they've done it with buy-in from both sides of the political aisle.
Really? Both sides? I'm surprised. I feel like you'd get a lot of pushback, you know?
Oh, there definitely was pushback at first. But the data is undeniable.
So what happened?
Finland proved that not only does housing first help individuals, but it also saves taxpayers money. It reduces the need for emergency services, shelters, all that. It's fiscally responsible.
That's incredible. I'd love to know more about how they did it, like step by step. What did they actually do?
Well, that's a great question for our next deep dive. We can get into all the nitty-gritty details of Finland's approach.
Sounds good. But from what I remember, there's another big thing Brosnahan talks about that's actually preventing us from fixing this problem: misinformation.
Oh yeah, the misinformation piece. That's where things get frustrating, to say the least. Brosnahan calls out these organizations that are spreading what she calls zombie lies about homelessness.
Zombie lies, like they just won't die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Falsehoods that keep coming back even after they've been debunked a million times. She really focuses on this one group called the Manhattan Institute.
Who are they?
They're like this right-wing think tank, and they churn out research that blames individuals for being homeless.
Hold on. If they're a think tank, shouldn't they be trying to solve the problem, not make it worse?
Well, think tanks often have agendas,
Oh, right.
and they're funded by groups with very specific interests. In this case, Brosnahan links the Manhattan Institute to wealthy individuals and corporations who benefit from policies that maintain the status quo.
Oh, wow. That's disturbing.
Right. If you believe homelessness is a personal failing, then you're less likely to support things like affordable housing or safety nets.
So it's all about manipulating the narrative to protect their own wealth.
Pretty much. And they do it so effectively because these zombie lies feed into our biases. It's easier to dismiss people when you think they're just lazy or made bad choices.
Ugh. That's infuriating. So how do we fight back? It seems impossible.
It is tough. It's like David versus Goliath,
Right.
But it starts with awareness. That's why Brosnahan's book is so crucial. She arms us with knowledge, with critical thinking skills. We have to question everything, look at the data, and be aware of our own biases.
It's like Media Literacy 101, but for homelessness.
Right. And we have to move beyond awareness. We have to actually create change.
Yeah, but how?
I think it's helpful to look at what's working elsewhere.
Yeah.
Remember Finland? We were blown away by them. We should get into the specifics of how they made housing first a reality.
Yes, please. Finland's approach goes against everything we've been taught to believe about homelessness. Yeah.
I know. It's so refreshing. It challenges that whole worthy versus unworthy thing.
Yeah, the idea that people have to somehow earn help.
Exactly. Finland just provides housing as a human right, full stop. No hoops to jump through.
I'm trying to picture it. Someone's living on the street, maybe struggling with addiction, and bam, they get a key to their own apartment, no strings attached.
It is radical, but that's housing first in a nutshell. And they made it happen on a national scale. Even got support from both sides of the political spectrum. It's incredible.
Wow, that's really interesting. I wonder if part of it is just their culture, Like maybe they have a different understanding of the role of government.
That's a good point. Their culture probably plays a role. But I also think a big part of their success is their focus on long-term solutions. They're not interested in quick fixes.
So it's not about just getting people off the streets. It's about giving them the support they need to stay off the streets.
Exactly. And that's where supportive housing comes in. They understand that people need help with mental health, job training, addiction, all of it.
Right.
They provide wraparound services that actually address the root causes of homelessness.
It's like you start with that foundation of housing and then build from there.
Exactly. And the best part, it's not just good for the individuals, it's good for society as a whole. Finland's actually saving money by reducing reliance on those expensive emergency services.
Wow. So it's not just compassionate, it's also smart policy.
Exactly. But I'm curious, what are you taking away from all this so far? What's sticking with you?
For me, it's realizing that homelessness is a solvable problem. We don't have to accept it as a fact of life. There are solutions out there, and they're working.
Couldn't agree more. We just need the will to implement them.
Well, I'm feeling inspired to learn more. I'm ready to dive into those solutions. Let's take a short break, and we'll be right back to continue our deep dive into homelessness in America. Welcome back. Before we jump into all those inspiring solutions, I want to address this thing about misinformation.
Yeah.
Brosnahan really hammers this home, how misinformation actually makes the problem worse, you know?
Oh, absolutely. She talks about these organizations that spread those, what you call them?
Zombie lies.
Yes. Zombie lies. Falsehoods that just keep coming back from the dead, even after they've been debunked over and over again.
Yeah, it's crazy how those myths have a life of their own.
It is. It's wild. One group she really singles out is the Manhattan Institute.
Manhattan Institute.
They're like this right-wing think tank.
Okay.
And they put out all this research that basically says homelessness is a personal problem.
Wait a minute. If they're a think tank, shouldn't they be, like, trying to find solutions, not spread misinformation? Doesn't make sense.
Well, think tanks usually have agendas, you know,
Right.
and they're often funded by groups with very specific interests.
Oh, so it's like a money thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Brosnahan links the Manhattan Institute to a bunch of wealthy individuals and corporations,
Of course.
the kind of folks who benefit from policies that keep things the way they are. You know, no change.
So they're basically twisting the narrative to protect their own wealth.
You got it. And it works. Because those zombie lies, they tap right into our biases. It's easier to look down on someone when you think they're just lazy or made bad choices. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so messed up. So how do we fight back? It seems like a losing battle.
It's not easy, but it starts with awareness. That's why Brosnahan's book is so powerful. It gives us the knowledge we need, those critical thinking skills. We have to question everything, look at the data, and be aware of our own biases.
So it's like Media Literacy 101, but for homelessness.
Exactly. But awareness isn't enough. We have to actually do something.
Yeah, that's the hard part. But what can we actually do?
Well, before we jump into all that, I think it helps to see what's working in other places.
Yeah.
Remember how impressed we were with Finland?
Oh, yeah. Finland's doing great.
We should dive into how they actually made housing first a reality.
Yes, let's. It's like their approach goes against everything we've been taught to believe about homelessness.
I know. It's like they threw out the rule book. They challenged that whole worthy versus unworthy thing.
Right. It's crazy how ingrained that idea is.
Totally. The whole idea that people have to somehow earn help.
It's messed up.
Totally. Finland just says housing is a human right, period. No conditions, no hoops to jump through.
I'm seriously trying to wrap my head around it. Like, picture someone living on the street, maybe struggling with addiction, and suddenly they get a key to their own apartment, just like that.
That's housing first, baby. Radical. Right. And they implemented it on a national scale. And get this, both political parties supported it.
Seriously, both sides. I'm shocked. That would never happen here.
There was definitely pushback at first. But once they saw the data, the results were undeniable.
What happened? What were the results?
Well, Finland proved that housing first not only helps individuals, but it also saves taxpayers money. Think about it. Less need for expensive emergency services, less reliance on shelters.
Oh, wow.
It's fiscally responsible and compassionate.
That's amazing. I'm so curious. How did they actually pull it off? Did they just snap their fingers and poof, everyone has a house?
Not quite. They had a plan. One of the big things they did was move away from those big, overcrowded shelters we have here.
Those huge warehouse-like shelters.
Exactly. Instead, they focused on getting people into their own apartments, scattered throughout the city.
Wow, so they're integrated back into the community, not isolated in these institutions?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that integration is huge EE.
Yeah.
It reduces stigma. It helps people feel like they belong again.
That makes sense.
They also really focused on speed. getting people housed as quickly as possible.
Like time is of the essence.
Exactly. Every night someone spends on the streets is another night they're exposed to danger, trauma, all of it.
Right. So it's about efficiency, recognizing the urgency of the situation.
Exactly. But even Finland faces challenges, right? We saw that in the documentary Invisible People.
Yeah, that was a really powerful film.
Remember how even with stable housing, some folks were still struggling with addiction, mental health issues. It made you wonder if housing first is just a Band-Aid solution.
Yeah, it did make me think, is it really enough?
It's a valid question. But remember, the whole philosophy of housing first is that housing is the foundation.
The starting point.
Right. It's hard to focus on getting better when you're worried about where you're going to sleep tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need those basic needs met before you can even think about anything else.
Exactly. And the caseworkers in the film, they really stressed that they don't just give people a house and forget about them.
Oh, good.
They provide ongoing support. They understand that recovery is a process.
So it's about having realistic expectations, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Housing first isn't a magic bullet, but it creates the stability people need to start rebuilding their lives.
I get it. But let's be real, doing something like this in the U.S., I mean, our political system is a mess, and we have all these deeply ingrained beliefs about individual responsibility.
Yeah, it wouldn't be easy. But Finland did it, and they had their own obstacles to overcome.
Right.
And remember, it wasn't an overnight success. They built consensus, they gathered data, they proved that their approach worked.
So it's about changing minds one by one.
And changing policies. It's a slow process, but it's possible. And it starts with individuals like us, recognizing that homelessness is solvable. It's not inevitable.
That's a powerful message. We have to believe that things can be better.
We do. We can't give in to cynicism and despair. We have to fight for that better world.
And Brosnahan really emphasizes that radical compassion thing, right?
Yes. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of their situation.
And taking action, both as individuals and as a society.
Totally. Whether it's volunteering, donating, or pushing for policy changes, there are so many ways to get involved.
I love that. Before we move on to those other solutions from around the world, what's really sticking with you?
Honestly, it's the fact that stable housing isn't just a humanitarian goal. It's actually a smart investment. Finland proved that.
Right. We can save money, create safer communities, and help people all at the same time. It makes you wonder why we're so resistant to these ideas here in the U.S.
Great point. And that leads perfectly into our next discussion. We're going to look at how other cities around the world are tackling homelessness.
Because there's not just one right way, right?
Exactly. Every place has its own unique challenges and solutions.
I'm excited to see what we can learn from them. Okay, so we've seen how Finland is tackling homelessness. Pretty impressive, right? But Finland's a small country, pretty homogenous. Can their model really work in more diverse, more complex places?
That's what makes this whole thing so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because there are tons of approaches out there. Each one's kind of tailored to the specific city or region.
Like what? Give me an example. I need some inspiration.
All right, how about Vienna, Austria? Yeah, Vienna. They're always ranked as one of the most livable cities in the world. And their housing policies, they're a big reason why.
Okay, I'm listening. What's their secret?
Well, they've been committed to affordable housing for over a century. Way back after World War I, they had a massive housing crisis.
Kind of like what a lot of American cities are facing now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the party in charge at the time, the Social Democrats, they made housing their top priority.
So what did they do? Did they just build a bunch of public housing projects?
They did invest in public housing, but it wasn't just about building more units. They introduced progressive taxes to fund it, and they came up with this cooperative housing model that's still super popular today.
Cooperative housing. I've heard of that, but I don't really get it.
It's cool. Imagine a bunch of people getting together to own and manage their housing together. They pool their resources, create a community where everyone has a stake.
So instead of owning your own apartment, you own a share of the whole building.
Exactly. And in Vienna, it's been wildly successful.
How successful?
Over 60% of Viennese residents live in some form of government-subsidized housing, either through these cooperatives or in rental units with regulated rents.
Wow, 60%. So they've made affordable housing accessible to most of their citizens.
Yeah, the idea is that housing is a human right, not just another way to make a profit. And it's had this ripple effect, less inequality, a stronger sense of community, a more stable environment for everyone.
That's amazing. But Vienna's in Europe. Their history is different. Their politics are different. Do you think something like that could work in the U.S.?
It's a good question. There would be challenges, for
Yeah.
sure. But I think there are lessons we can learn from them, like their focus on non-market housing,
Mm.
those cooperatives. We could definitely explore that more here.
Didn't Brosnahan talk about something called limited equity cooperatives in her book?
LECs, yes. That's a type of cooperative housing where residents own shares in the cooperative, not their individual unit.
Oh, right, right.
And that keeps costs down.
Okay.
Plus, those units can't be sold on the open market, so they stay affordable long term.
So it prevents that crazy speculation that drives prices up.
Exactly. It's a built-in safeguard.
Mm-hmm.
Creates a more stable, more equitable housing market.
I love that. It's not just about me, me, me. It's about everyone having a safe place to live.
Right. It's about shifting our focus from individual ownership to the well-being of the whole community.
Yeah.
And there are places in North America trying this out. Vancouver's been investing in non-market housing for a while now.
Really? How's it going?
It's not a perfect solution, but it's definitely helped. They're still facing affordability challenges, but those alternative models had made a difference.
That's really good to hear. I'm curious, though, going back to those cultural differences, what is it about Vienna that makes their approach to housing so successful?
Well, for one thing, they have this long history of social democracy. There's a strong belief in the role of government to provide for the common good, including housing.
So it's not seen as a partisan issue, it's just part of their values.
Right. It's not about left versus right. This belief cuts across the political spectrum. And that means they have consistent policies, long-term investments. It doesn't matter who's in power.
It's so different here. Every time a new party gets elected, everything changes.
And that inconsistency makes it really hard to make any real progress.
Oh.
But it's not just politics, it's culture too. There's a real emphasis on community and solidarity in Vienna. People understand that we're all in this together. You know, the well-being of one person affects everyone.
Like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. And that applies to housing too. They recognize that everyone deserves a safe, affordable place to live.
I gotta say, this whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I'm starting to realize that the way we do things in the U.S. isn't the only way, and it's definitely not working.
It's easy to get stuck in our own bubble and think that this is just how things are, but seeing how other countries are tackling these issues, it shows us that there are other possibilities out there.
It's like Brosnahan said, cynicism is a luxury we can't afford.
We can't afford to give up hope. We have to be open to new ideas, challenge our assumptions, and believe that we can create a better world.
I love that. A better world is possible. But it takes action, right?
Absolutely. We have to put that belief into practice. It starts with us, volunteering, donating, advocating for change. We all have a role to play.
Well, I'm definitely feeling inspired, and I hope our listeners are too. This deep dive has given me a new perspective on homelessness. It's shown me that there are solutions out there if we're willing to fight for them.
That's the spirit. This is just the beginning of the journey. Keep learning, keep exploring, keep pushing for that world where everyone has a home.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into homelessness in America. We hope you learned something, we hope it challenged you, and most importantly, we hope it inspired you to take action. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep fighting for a more just and compassionate world.